Well, here we are. Happy New Year. We have Greg Parks back on UFL Board on paternity leave. Greg, how the heck are you? It's been an exciting time for you and your family.
It has. Thank you, Reed. We had our little blessing on Christmas Eve, so I got to spend all Christmas in the hospital, which is not the greatest place to spend Christmas, but for a good cause for sure. And I've been off the last couple of weeks. Helping my wife out here around the house with the baby and everything like that. And it's been a lot of fun, a lot of new things, learning new things every day, how to take care of a small child. But it's been, a blessing. We're so happy she's healthy and everything like that. So I go back to school next week. It's going to be tough, but gotta continue making that money.
Yeah, well, so to set the stage here, Greg's coming on today. Greg just put out a poll for UFL Board kind of leading into season 2. What did fans think about, kind of temperature check for season 1? What do we think about season 2? We'll get Greg's thoughts on that. I know Greg's also been busy with the Raw on Netflix. I've been watching lots of PW Torch stuff. Not so much Greg on there, but obviously talking with you behind the scenes, but seeing Wade and Brandon and everyone else there, Penta's debut and everything. So I'm very excited about it. I have my Cena shirt and I have my plane tickets bought for Vegas. So I haven't quite popped on the $2,000 whatever for a 2-day ticket, but we'll see. So we'll talk WrestleMania real quick. Power rankings, new baby, Raw on Netflix, UFL season 2. What is the order of importance here at the Parks household?
New baby number 1, which means some of the things that used to be priorities are not so anymore, but UFL season 2 number 2, Raw on Netflix number 3. I mean, it's still Monday Night Raw. Not a ton has changed, so that's kind of the order. My first impressions right now, anyway.
Well, good. Well, we'll talk here. So UFL season 2, we'll get through the poll results here in a minute. Greg, we haven't had you on since, we had the schedule release. We were talking their opening expansion for ownership. We had John Lewis come on with John Lewis Sports to kind of talk through all of that stuff over kind of the off season. What is just kind of general thoughts here? We're January 15th as we record this. I think it'll be Friday. March 28th, right, is kickoff. We just saw Jordan Teamu re-sign. We've had some transactions and things. How are you kind of feeling right now?
Pretty optimistic. I think things never really move at the pace that we would prefer them to. We wanted the schedule earlier, partly because we wanted them to be able to sell individual tickets earlier to individual games, which I think is probably coming maybe at the end of this month, beginning of next month, based on kind of what I've seen out there. But they're doing things, they're getting things done. Transactions you mentioned, they're signing a lot of talented players. I think the talent pool for 2025 in the UFL is going to be deeper than even 2024. So I'm really looking forward to that. And not only the talent pool being deeper, but now you're in season 3, season 4 of some of these teams existing under these coaching staffs. So you should see the gelling of these teams and the opening of the playbooks, both offensively and defensively, get a little better. You're not going to see the simplicity maybe that you saw at times last season because they were rushing around and so many players were new because of the dispersal draft and everything like that. You've got players going on season 4 of a Birmingham Stallions. You're going on players who are on season 3 playing under Bob Stoops and the Arlington Renegades. So that's the opportunity for coaches to kind of say, okay, we have the basics down. We have the playbook down pretty well. Let's add some wrinkles to it as we go. So I'm hoping we see that. We've seen ownership and some high-level management talk in the offseason. They seem very optimistic. Of course, what else are they going to say, right? But, I mean, that kind of gives you the warm fuzzies inside heading into season 2. We're seeing the commercials drop. I know, Reed, you've had some strong feelings about the commercials on Fox.
Do you like the commercial? I mean, I'm glad they're getting airtime. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think it's obviously in a big spot right now to do that. But what's your thoughts on the
I like them, and I like them because they're creative. They catch your eye. If you're someone who doesn't really pay much attention to commercials and kind of let commercials wash over you, you may take a second to stop, and it might attract your eyes. But most of all, it gives the impression that Fox is serious about this. They obviously put a lot of time and effort. This wasn't just slapping some highlights together and doing a voiceover and saying, let's just put it out there. They really marketed this, and they really put some thought into the marketing of these ads. So that gives me a lot of confidence about where Fox is at with the UFL as a brand. So maybe even more so than just liking the commercials, I like what the presentation tells me as a viewer.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you have ESPN and you have Destroying on, right? They clearly the league views him as one of the more marketable stars, and they set it up at the beginning, right? Okay, Donald's back here, season, his second season, but it was mostly about Donald. Okay, training with Travis Hunter. How's your YouTube channel going? And like ESPN's a media partner, right? So they should be doing, in my view, the same that Fox is in terms of running all that. Yeah, in terms of ownership, we saw The Rock on Netflix, obviously not talk, not talk UFL. In his New Year's Day post, there was a lot of like doing things that you want to do, not doing things you have to do. And I'm curious where the UFL fits into the kind of The Rock's, current kind of mindset of that. I did like also we had Russ Brandon on Front Office Sports this week with their editor in chief. I thought Russ is always pretty good for that and talking like, well, we're still really trying to be nimble and we don't really have a game plan yet. We're still trying to kind of figure this out. I like that. I like kind of that open honesty. I wish they were a little bit more with the fans that way, but I like that. Like, hey, we're really trying to figure this out. Like, we don't have all the answers. Do you like that kind of that humility of that for the league? I think it's a good look for Russ, who sometimes, as a former NFL guy, could come across as like, I'm an expert, which obviously he is, but like kind of being a little bit more honest.
Sure. And what it does is it tempers expectations. I think, we would love to see this league take off like a rocket and spend all kinds of money to do that and to patch the holes that they have right now. And we'll get into what some of those holes are that fans see. But I think realistically, and this is something Russ Brandon brings up all the time when he does interviews, something Daryl Johnston brings up all the time when they do interviews, is we've just passed the 1 year mark of the UFL as an entity. And so I think that kind of, for the people who are constantly wanting from the league, I think what that does is it kind of says, okay, let's take a step back here and let's understand where we are as a brand. We're 1 year in. And when you look at year one of the UFL, yes, you can pick nits, and yes, you can complain about some things, attendance, marketing, whatever like that. But just the fact that they were able to have the quality of broadcast and have the quality of gameplay that they had, kicking off just over 2 months after the merger was official, is really a feather in the cap of league management and ownership. So I think we have to look at that as well. But now, obviously, full offseason in the books, heading into year two, this is where you want to see some of those improvements. And I think ownership and league management acknowledge that where they have shortcomings and where they're trying to improve.
All right, so let's look into this here. We'll go through all the survey votes, and we'll get Greg's thoughts on all this, and then we have some questions for the audience at the end. Like I said, as I break my microphone, like and subscribe. Trying to get to 4,000 subscribers. Dustin with Royal Retros is going to give away a couple custom jerseys. We can take care of all that. I have a Sea Dragons 2020 away jersey. Lots of different options there, and they have lots of UFL and stuff here as well. But I will link the article in the YouTube here. We have the UFL Fan Voice Survey Results and Analysts. First question here, and obviously I'll encourage everyone to go on and kind of read through all this, but we're talking question one: how would you grade ownership on the overall performance of the first season of the UFL? You can see there 57%, vast majority with a B, feeling good. I'm curious if that, if it was just a championship game, it might not be a B, but overall, I mean, and I think everyone left the season feeling like, okay, this was, we accomplished this, the wedding happened, right? We kind of got through the event. What did you make and what did you see here? I know we talked a lot about kind of the difference between social media and, and what the actual results and kind of feelings are. So what did you take from this?
Sure. And, social media, you can kind of get bogged down in negativity, and that goes for any topic, not just the UFL, but, I'm a wrestling fan. I cover professional wrestling, and it's the same way there. And I'm sure it's the same once you get into any genre of entertainment, that there's just a lot of negativity. So sometimes when you surround yourself with that, it can feel like, boy, nobody likes this. Nobody likes the decisions they're making. Everybody's very hard on ownership. But again, when you take a step back and you realize where we are with the UFL in year two, when you realize all the heavy lifting that had to be done to make season one happen the way it did, I think people looked at ownership and said, okay, we'll give them a B. They got it off the ground. It was an entertaining product. It worked, right? It drew viewership to the television networks, which is one of the big goals. And I am curious as to now that has worn off a little bit, now that the ownership and the management have a full off season, and now that we get into year 2, if there are not a lot of changes, if attendance doesn't go up, if ratings don't go up substantially, if it's the same broadcast, like, is that honeymoon over with the fans? Are they going to look with a more strict eye at ownership next year when we do this survey and say, well, year 1 looked a lot like year 2, that they didn't make those improvements, they didn't make those jumps that they had talked about wanting to make in the offseason?
I think a lot, and we've heard this even when Daryl Johnston was on the show and Russ on the interview this week with Front Office Sports, like a lot's on that. Like we really only had too much, and I totally buy that, right? Where they were kind of in a little bit of a standstill, and I think maybe more football ops that way, right? Maybe there's more conversations happening behind the scenes, and we're maybe, hey, we're working out together because we're kind of hey, we're going to be together, but like the teams and everything existed. I mean, like, yeah, it was a really fire hose like hydrant. Okay, we got to go now. But it wasn't like none of the infrastructure was in place. I mean, I do obviously grant them kind of that grace, but I think a lot to that. The other thing, just for me with Russ on that interview this week, they were talking about, and obviously Russ isn't going to get into like performance metrics, which I was kind of hoping of, like money or ratings. He's like, well, we're on 76 or 78% of our games are on broadcast. It's like, well, that's not because of like anything you guys earned. I mean, that's because Fox and ESPN have a vested interest in making this work. But it wasn't like you've started and, it's like wrestling. You started in warehouse, whatever, on, closed circuit. Now you've worked your way up to a Netflix. I mean, you were given a lot of this that we're kind of promoting as part of your success.
Yeah. And I think that's more of, him saying, this is a spring league that's going to work. And why is it going to work? It's because we are 76 or 78% on, Fox, ESPN, ABC, whatever it is. It's giving the viewers the best chance to sample the product. They're not hiding this away. So I think it's also saying, hey, ownership is serious about this. They're giving us prime real estate on their television networks. They want it to succeed. We want it to succeed. So, I think it's more of that than saying, hey, look, we did so well that we're on these networks now. I don't think it was that so much as we're on these networks and it's giving us the best chance of success as a spring league, because anytime a Russ Brandon is out there or anyone else, they're not talking to fans. They're talking to potential sponsors. They're talking to potential team owners. They're talking to potential investors in the league. And they want those people to know that it's safe to invest with the UFL. They're not going anywhere. And this is an example of that.
Especially like with that Army stuff that kind of came out. Are you surprised? I mean, it didn't really seem like they had really any long like it felt like that could have been a thing with The Rock and them. It feels like they kind of weathered that in terms of sponsorships, kind of, rushing to pull out or anything.
That story felt so one-sided and so like outrageous. Like, how do you even measure the fact that they lost commitments based on this sponsor? Like, it just seemed like someone had an axe to grind, and there was not a lot of fact checking done by the author. There was not a lot. I mean, it was just so outrageous, some of the claims in there, that it was just really hard, I think, for anyone to take seriously the article and some of the claims in there. So I think that's why maybe it didn't take hold as much as it did. And now, of course, Russ Brandon saying, hey, we're on good terms. Although I think an article came out and said that the Army isn't going to be working with the UFL this year, or at least isn't going to be a presenting sponsor the way it was last year. So they may have severed ties, but it doesn't sound like it's as acrimonious as the initial article made it sound.
Yeah, we were in Boston that week on like a Mariners like party road trip. So it was not the height of I was like, oh, this is interesting. I will say though, and just one of my Kraken podcasts I was listening to yesterday was talking about this, that we've had coaching issues and locker room issues. And this national media reporter came out and had the story, and there were all these questions, and they raised a good point. And I would echo this with the UFL, that like, we're kind of in this minutia every day, right? As much as we can, where, you do get like the Kevin Seiferts of the world or whoever had that report. Like, they're kind of popping in once every 3-4 months, kind of like, okay, what's going on? Okay, what's the league told me? Like, you're not getting that same kind of access that way. And maybe there was ruffled feathers or whatever, but you're someone that's just kind of popping into the situation to figure it out versus like, I've been living through this the entire season. And like, that doesn't make, I just thought it was interesting because people were going crazy for Seattle. And you're like, well, this is just one local guy, not even the local guy, one national guy from, Minneapolis or whatever, freaking out about this. And you're like, well, okay, we can kind of look through this with a little bit different
support your local media.
Yes. Anything else with that? Anything else with I would probably be a B-, B-, but that's fine to have an A, B, C, D. I would be in that camp.
Yeah, and what I did too, because we had done at UFL Board back last year when it was XFL Board, we had done a very similar survey, a lot of the similar questions that I asked at the end of the XFL 2023 season. And so I kind of compared the scores to each other for the UFL and XFL. And certainly the scores were quite similar in terms of the B. That was the overarching feeling of XFL fans after 2023. They gave it a B, although the D's and F's were much less for UFL ownership this year than it was for XFL ownership at the end of 2023 season.
You probably had a lot of USFL guys too, like, this stunk, like this was no good. We're kind of all in this, we're all in the van together, right?
Yeah.
We're all on the road trip. How would you assess the on-field play? This is in line with what I would say in terms of, better than I expected, 53.2%, a worse 0.5%, about what I expected. That's what I've always said. The quality of play with the XFL, and certainly as you said off the top with the talent sign going into this year, that is one of the strengths. This is the highest quality of football we've seen in the spring league, right? In at least since kind of the 80s. Thoughts on that in terms of that statement and then the results?
Yeah, for sure. Promising results. If you're the UFL, especially the football ops department, you guys know what they're doing. And so, the about what I expected is a little misleading, because if you expected a higher level and it was a higher level, that's your vote. So it is very promising to see that a lot of people, the football is not the problem. Is what we can say by this answer. We can kind of set that aside and say, because a lot of times when we talk about spring football, we say that a big part of its success is going to be, what is the quality of play on the field? I think we can kind of set that aside now, and we can focus on some of the other issues that need work.
Correct. And I agree with that 100%. I think a lot is rested from ownership on the quality of, and it's like, yes, like we understand the quality of sport, the football is great. Now we need to focus on other things. Like you've done step one, but there's 87, and I'm just thinking about all the different TV shows coming back like that. Severance is on Apple. And I think Dorothy went to school with the guy that like works on that show. But like we talk rate, and we'll talk TV ratings, all this. We're in such a fragmented space anymore. Like, what is TV ratings anymore? Netflix is thrilled with this stuff with Raw on there. Like, it's a whole new benchmark. Like, they can't even, I don't know. I just think there's so much fragmentation anymore. But yes, on field of play is good. And I do think it'll only improve with kind of, we've had some coaching shakeups and some players resign, and we're still kind of figuring out all that stuff. But I do think, it should be good going into the season. Anything else on this one?
Nope, I think that's it.
Now, this is surprising. Number 3, taking into account all aspects of production, which network do you believe had the better game? Fox, ABC, ESPN, or no significant? Everyone raves about the Fox broadcast. Everyone, at least our audience, is very down on the ESPN broadcast. So this to me very speaks to, yes, Fox with 46%. I don't get that more than just like people are down on the ESPN talent or the focus on betting. Like, what do you, obviously Fox has been, but ESPN has been doing football games for decades too.
Yeah. Anecdotally, I was hearing the same things you were, that people were saying Fox was such a better broadcast. And I'm scratching my head and I'm like, maybe, but to me, it's incremental, if anything. And then to see it borne out in the results, this is the hard data, right? This is people are really thinking this. So I think part of it is people get annoyed by the betting, which was a lot heavier on the ESPN side of things. I think some of it could be the talent that you mentioned in terms of presentation. Fox, I think, probably had a little higher level. Joel Klatt doing games. I mean, that's a big deal. He does major college football games. He's probably one of the best in the business as a color analyst. And ESPN didn't really have anyone that could approach that. Like, I loved Greg McElroy in XFL 2020 and 2023. He wasn't there last year for ESPN. So I think those two may be the two keys. Beyond that, I don't really have an answer that would push me so far in the direction of saying, well, Fox's broadcast was a lot better. I do think I think that ABC and ESPN had a lot more of the audio from on field and from coaches that were live. So there was a lot more muting of things, and Fox didn't have that audio and didn't have the muting issues when you had guys cursing and things like that. So if that was something that annoyed you as well, that may have pushed you in the direction of Fox for this answer.
Yeah, we said before, this is Fox just knows how to do their football, and there's no real sense that this is any sort of different product, right, than the NFL, just in terms of the resources and the way they talk and they do. It's the same game where it feels a little bit more bootleggy sometimes on ESPN with Fox, or excuse me, with the XFL and then the UFL. Like, I agree with the betting, and then also like ESPN had laid off all those people, so you're getting people that aren't, maybe weren't even the B tier that were kind of going on.
The familiarity too, I think, is the thing, because Fox announcers may have felt like they were a little more familiar with the product and some of the players than the ESPN, ABC announcers were. That could have been another point in Fox's favor.
Yeah, we had heard that, like, well, it didn't seem like the ESPN, like, maybe they hadn't researched enough. Like, we've had Kevin Kugler on here a lot talking about, like, God, I got to spend hours kind of figuring out who all these players are, because this isn't like a Patrick Mahomes where you just, the story writes itself. I got to talk about, okay, and then Jordan Ta'amu, and he went and did this, and he was here. Like, and maybe they just don't have the time, right? Maybe they're trying to balance, and that's one of 18 things on their slate that week. So I could see that as well. But yeah, definitely not a surprise for me that way. This would be a good one to get Rick Saratella on, talking about the live experience of a UFL game. When Greg, I don't know if you heard that episode, Rick went like with scorched earth, like had the worst. How would you assess the live experience of UFL game? Better, about what I expect, worse than I expect, did not attend. To me, no surprise. 35%, obviously over. We have a third of the people didn't attend the games. That makes sense considering the UFL this season is not in all the same markets. So maybe you were a fan of XFL Seattle and you're not in all that. I've had a great time every time I've gone to the games. I think they spend a lot of time working halftime things and kind of for media commercial breaks and doing things with the fans. Greg, I can't remember if you had a chance to attend a game live, and then if so, but then what's your thoughts on the results?
I attended a Orlando Guardians game as media, so I was in the press box. I've never been to a game sitting in the stands. Yeah. So, look, I think one thing we have to remember about a survey of this nature is I'm not going out in the community and surveying fans. Yes. I'm not going to the stadium and surveying fans. These are the hardcore fans that are taking this survey. And so if you just asked a casual fan who may kind of stumble into a game at some point, they may have different answers than this. Yeah. So I think that's something we have to keep in mind for not just this answer, but the survey as a whole is, these are the fans who are seeking out information about UFL online. And so I just want to throw that out there as well. But I wrote in my analysis here, which you can see on the screen, this is a feather in the cap of a lot of the people who work hard behind the scenes at the stadium, the people who, as you mentioned, come up with the ideas of how to entertain the fans at halftime and come up with the giveaways and do the local advertising to get fans out and do, things like that. I mean, that is to have a majority or a plurality anyway, say that an experience was better than they expected even is a good thing. And hopefully that kind of word of mouth spreads at the anecdotal level in these cities, because, you need fans to attend these games.
Yeah, to me, this speaks better to this result, just because, like you said, these are the hardcore fans. Like, I would think a casual fan, the experience plays very well. Like, I think this is probably a little bit more like a string, like a hardcore wrestling fan. Like, okay, I have my expectations. Where if you're just bringing a family, you're like Dorothy doesn't, like, oh, this is fun. Like, we're going. I will say, as someone that has attended, these games as a fan and media, but as a fan with Dorothy, and then CFL games, like, there is a lot of heavy lifting needed to kind of keep everybody engaged during the entire time, especially halftime and stuff when you don't necessarily know all the players. So I think they do a good job as lifting that. Dorothy and I always laugh. I think it was last year we saw a BC Lions game, and that, the quarter entertainment or the halftime entertainment was the guy had already, walking into the game, had won a free tire for his car. And they're like, well, you can risk that to win up to 4 tires. And I'm like, okay, so this is like, well, you've already won. Like, you can just walk out of here. But no, but it's a lot of heavy lifting. I think they do.
And that's the importance of local sponsorship too. Get those local companies involved, get a tire shop here who's going to donate it, and then advertise it at halftime that, hey, this is coming from this local tire shop. I mean, that's the kind of really outside the box thinking you've got to do when you have, this isn't an NFL team where sponsors are going to want to flock to it. You have to go out there and pound the pavement for these sponsors and for these local companies. And those are the kind of creative things sometimes you have to do.
And that's also one of the roles that this, kind of all season long employees we need to have for this league. Is like, you're the one going in this time of year, like, hey, what do you think about sponsoring this upcoming, like, even the Kraken podcast we listen to, like, they got some lawyer sponsoring them now. Like, you got to be creative with that. Like, hey, you got a couple $100 to throw our way and we can put your name, like, you got to always be in this. Yeah. Like you said, this is not the NFL at all. I've always said this is way more like the CFL, where you need to be proactive and going out there. Anything else game day? I think they do a good job. Like, they always got people working booths and stuff. Choctaw, you can walk around that whole thing. There's stuff to look at. I thought they do a good job with the shops they have too. I think you can get a lot of good stuff there. They had all sorts of different stuff you could try on. Anything else with that?
The one question I didn't ask, and maybe it was an oversight on my part, I certainly didn't purposely omit it, was asking about the pricing of tickets. And I wonder if people took that into account when they answered this question, because UFL games a lot more affordable than a lot of the other professional sports that may be happening in that city. So some people may have taken that into account when they're answering this question positively.
Yeah, I agree. I to me, the only bemoaning I've ever seen for tickets was like when they increased it from $10 versus 2020 to now, or like, I'm like, this is very affordable compared to any, like,
yeah,
I understand you might've been paying 60 and now you're paying 75 or whatever, but like in all, this is pretty affordable. As someone that pays $160 to go to Kraken games, like, this is pretty affordable to go.
Right.
How would you assess UFL's merchandise? Taking into account, I like this question. Taking into account variety, price, quality, better than I expected, about 46. Worse than I expected, 28, and then no opinion, 13. Yeah, I feel like it's there. Nothing's really wowed me. I had thoughts, when the shop came on, and I thought they should have had more available if you're going to make a big shop launch, as opposed to kind of silently rolling stuff out. I won't be buying any more UFL merch, but what do you think of kind of the results of the question?
I haven't purchased any, so my answer was no opinion on this. I'm still kind of waiting for, like, I don't want to buy a bunch of UFL merch and then like have them say, oh, we're shutting down. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with all this Memphis Showboat stuff? So I would like to see the league survive and thrive before I start spending significant money on merchandise. But, from browsing the shop as I do from time to time, it certainly looks a lot better than the XFL shop. And the answers, when you compare, because I asked a similar question about the XFL, and the answers are certainly a lot more favorable to the UFL shop. And I do think the variety is there. I do think they look good to me. A lot of the products, a lot of the clothing and things like that, you would expect as time goes on for them to continue to roll out new products. But yeah, about what I expected. I'm surprised better than I expected didn't get more votes, just because that's kind of my own, from perusing the shop. I kind of thought it's better, especially for year one. Again, we go back to kind of grading on a curve here.
Yes.
And for the UFL shop to have the level of merchandise they do, having just been over a year old, is pretty impressive to me.
It feels like a shop now. It felt like especially when the USFL had their original one, like, that was when Paul and I were making like our own stuff, when we were kind of really on the merch thing, and like, it was mostly just for us to like be able to buy stuff to wear. But like, they were using like the same templates and things that we were using. And I'm like, this does not speak to like a high quality. We're like, oh, I see how they designed those sweatpants because we have the exact same, like we're using the same software. That should not be a good thing. Feels like more of a shop now. Pricing wise, shit. I just bought that John Cena shirt. It was like $45. I mean, I haven't bought this wrestling shirt in a while. So like clearly that's like what the pricing is now. But I was surprised $45 plus shipping for a WWE t-shirt.
And pricing maybe too, because that's one thing I noticed as well. I mean, the prices to me, and again, I don't buy a lot of merch. So, maybe as you said, that's the going rate now for merchandise for major companies. Like I'm afraid now to go on the NFL shop and see how much things are, but the prices do seem high. But again, that could be just the going rate these days.
Oh, and then the last thing I was going to say was just in terms of like, we always get that like with misprints and stuff, in terms of like quality. I think the quality of merchandise is just plummeted like across the board. I don't even think it's a UFL thing. Like I think Fanatics and just whole like, I get so many like really nice hats and things I bought that like don't look right. And so anyway, I mean, I've seen quality issues, and I think my XFL 2020, one of my jerseys was printed like crooked. Like the quality of merchandise is horrendous anymore. So I think that the UFL is just a part of that as well. Now, this is what we like. What is the most important thing the UFL needs to improve for season 2? More advertising of the league nationally. We see those commercials, more marketing of the league in team markets, more competitive pay to attract players, stronger social media presence, better communication from the league, depth charts, injury reports, things with the fans. Games on more consistent time slots is 0% voted for that, which is weird. Higher quality of on-field play, 10%, and then other, please specify with 5%. So majority of people echoing us, 48% want more advertising in the team markets. I think nationally right now we're doing fine. We've been talking about those commercials. Pay for the players got a large portion as well with 13%. This echoes what I've been screaming. I mean, are you surprised with these results at all?
I'm a little surprised because I offered so many possibilities, and this just came from what I had been hearing. Like I tried to take, whether it was on podcasts, whether it was on social media, whether it was on the UFL board message board, I tried to take in all of the stuff that I'd been hearing consistently and offer those as options. And of course, the other option as well, that where people could kind of write in their own if I didn't touch on it. So I thought maybe giving so many options, one wouldn't be the overwhelming winner, but as I mentioned in the analysis, fans didn't take that bait, and it was advertising in team markets. I think fans acknowledge the need to grow attendance in these markets, the need to get word out about these teams, especially with the use of the hub in Arlington. When these teams are not located in these cities, it is especially important for the marketing to reach the fans and the people in those cities. And so, and look, this is something that the league acknowledges. Again, when Moose Johnston, when Russ Brandon go and do these media interviews, they acknowledge this as much as we do. So it's one thing to acknowledge it. It's another thing to do something about it and to have an effective plan in place. And I guess we'll see come March and April whether or not that plan for year 2 worked.
I just curious your thoughts, and we've talked obviously with John Lewis, whatever that a week or two ago about the schedule and all that stuff. Like, especially for a market like the Brahmas, 4 home games. You're losing the game anyway. You're not going home until the first part of the season because of March Madness. Like, that feels like an impossible task to me there. Like trying to mobilize a fan base for 4 home games in a calendar year, right? You're not playing until halfway through the season. Like, you're always going to have oddities like that just with scheduling and kind of the way this league works, but it's really hard. I mean, I don't know what my sales pitch would be for that. Like, here, come out and support your team. That could be duty by the time they even play in front of you and you get 4. Like, to me, it's just really hard. I don't envy the people. Like, I think that this is a lot harder than, just kind of saying it out loud, but I don't generally know what you do. And just curious, like, especially markets like San Antonio that have struggled already.
Well, it's cheaper to buy season tickets to 4 games than to 5.
There you
go.
So
there's a big selling point for you. But no, I think, and that's why you have seasoned people, hopefully, in these markets whose background is marketing and whose background is advertising and who are a lot more creative than I am in coming up with ways to reach out to fans. And, a lot of it is just, first of all, getting that team to getting people in that city to acknowledge that this team exists. That's the first step. You can't sell people on a team they don't know exists. So it's going to local high school football games and setting up a booth. It's going to events in that city and setting up a booth. It's meeting people where they are and getting word out about the team. And once you've done that, then you can say, hey, we've got these 4 home games coming up. Casual fans and people who are not hardcore followers of this aren't going to know, why are there 4 home games instead of 5? You know, they're not going to ask those kind of questions. You just want to bring them in and get their feet wet into UFL football first, and then let them ask those kind of questions later.
I want to get your thoughts. And I was just looking ahead here in another tab to just remind myself the questions. We'll talk attendance, but I'm curious your thoughts here in terms of the marketing, in terms of the fan base, you know, with the UFL being on Fridays, obviously SmackDown leaving, and we have college football right, and then they're going to take that over. John Lewis and I kind of, bemoaned on the fact that a lot of these early Friday games are in some of the struggling markets for the UFL. And if you're going to have a UFL game on Fox primetime, like week 1 is in Houston, they're moving back to the original stadium, but obviously Houston has been a lackluster. Week 2, we have the Michigan Panthers. Week 3, we have the Stallions, perhaps there 4 is the Panthers again. We have the Brahmas in there week 7, and then they're traveling, doing that for the St. Louis. Like, curious, the energy that the WWE is able to kind of harness there for that Friday night show, right? And, they do the interstitial where they cut in, hey, we got the big show coming up here. There are a lot of people. Like, how can the UFL work to replicate that? Or, like, just curious your thoughts on that now that we kind of know how these home games have laid out.
You and John did a great job of breaking down the schedule. For anyone who hasn't listened to that episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to that. You guys brought up a lot of things that I didn't even think about. And I do think there are some legitimate questions about what led to the schedule developing the way it did. I think the answer is always going to be the league is not in a position to dictate dates to the stadiums. Instead, it's the stadiums dictating dates to the league. So you kind of have to take what you get. And that's what leads to Houston being, I would not have been among the top half of guesses as to who was going to get that first Friday night game. But it's Houston, probably because there's a scheduling conflict somewhere, or there's something behind the scenes that we're not even thinking about that was requiring Houston to host that first Friday home game. So I kind of think it's just stuff that's on another level that we're not even thinking about. Would I prefer to see St. Louis hosting the first home game? Sure. Would UFL management probably prefer to see St. Louis hosting that first Friday night home game? Absolutely, but it just didn't work out that way. So I do think more so after the schedule was released, I am really excited about what Friday night UFL football could be. Looking at the college football ratings, I tracked all of them. Looking at the college basketball ratings so far, I think they've had 3 or 4 games of college basketball on that Friday night, and 3/4 of them have been under 1 million viewers. So I'm not sure that the expectations are going to be super high ratings wise. No, absolutely for the UFL. But I do think having a night that you can brand as your own, because when you're a spring league like this, you're always looking for what can I call my own? What can I really hang my hat on as a league that's going to get fans to check it out? How can I be different than other leagues? And I think having this Friday night football game every week, because when it was first announced, one of the things we were wondering is, okay, are they going to be sharing dates with other sports games? Are they going to be, is it going to be 5 dates? But it's all year. So that is something that I think can really work in the favor of the UFL this season.
I'm in just having gone through the schedule, John. That is probably the most excited thing I am for and curious thing kind of going into this year, because I think and that was kind of my question. I think it's such an opportunity to get a totally different demo that's watching Fox on Friday at home, younger, whatever, you're going to get it's very different than a mid-Saturday game on, ABC or whatever. I just think there's a different demo. It's like, I watched this YouTube tech guy, he's got like millions of subscribers, but like he was just on Jimmy Fallon, because that's a totally different audience than what I have. And so I'm hoping that they utilize that. And like you said, I think it's awesome. It's every week, it's, 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock Eastern. I just hope that they're able to the visuals of it don't hurt them coming out the gate where you're at maybe a lackluster attendance. That's what I'm just worried about is we have all this gangbusters going in, and by the time we get to some of these better games, they're like, well, no one's, it looks dead on TV or no one's watching.
Yeah, you always fear that narrative. I'm not sure.
I always fear the worst. So
I understand that. Hey, we're spring football fans. That's, we're pessimistic by nature, but I'm not really sure that historically, when you look at, and now, we have a pretty substantial amount of data for these spring leagues over the last several years. I'm not really sure there's any correlation to viewership with fans in the stands, right? St. Louis doesn't draw significantly more viewership than a Memphis game, or anything like that. So I really don't know how much damage that can do other than, Mike Florio on Pro Football Talk making a post about how, it's a Friday night game and they're not drawing very well. I don't know.
Yeah. This one, so the other one on this, and then we're getting into some rules and stuff. Biggest concern moving forward, and that's why I kind of started with the attendance thing. That leading with 33%, TV ratings at 6%. Interesting, because it's just something that I feel like generates so many clicks on YouTube. It's like, oh, the ratings ran like 6% of people are actually curious about that. Long-term financial backing from ownership at 32%, viability of the franchises, 13, lack of franchises in key regions, East Coast, West Coast, 11% others. We always talk attendance. I guess I'm just concerned, or not concerned. I'm just surprised that television ratings concern is so low. I mean, maybe we've just heard it from enough experts that are like, it's fine. And then obviously the long-term backing here, basically a third as well. Are you thoughts on kind of the results?
Well, as far as the television ratings, I think if I look back to the XFL survey in 2023, I think that score was much higher. But I think the results of 2024 has assuaged a lot of fans that, okay, we've kind of hit a mark that's acceptable in television ratings and television viewership for the UFL. So that's not so much a problem. Let's bring some of these other bigger problems to the fore, being attendance and long-term financial backing. Almost the same amount of votes, interestingly enough, between attendance and long-term financial backing, which is interesting because long-term financial backing from ownership is either going to be you have a league or you don't.
Yes.
Attendance probably, attendance is important for sure, but they can survive drawing 10,000 in Memphis if ownership is willing to continue to move forward.
Well, and as we've just said, that like attendance doesn't necessarily correlate to TV ratings either. So it's like that's more than just like a pride thing. Like we want to have more people in the stands.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously an easy way to get revenue through ticket sales and then merchandise of the fans who come. It makes it look better as a TV product, sure, but it's not. I don't think whether you draw 10,000 or 15,000 in Memphis is not going to make or break the UFL.
No, but having long-term financial backing,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you just. I don't know. In terms of this long, even just the backing, I guess just the commitment of it. I mean, Russ can say as many times, like, we're all in this and we've done, and even that interview this week, but we still, there's no guide rails or timetables or benchmarks. I mean, we're kind of in the dark here. So I think that all kind of goes into that together of like, we just want to have some sort of way to tell, are we accomplishing what we're trying to do or not?
And I guess the other way you can look at these results is only 32% are concerned about the long-term financial backing. That tells you that people are believing what the Russ Brandons and Moose Johnsons are saying, that, hey, we are here for the long haul. Ownership is committed to this. And there's a belief amongst fans that that's true.
Anything else on this one? To me, I think that, the visibility ties into obviously the marketing up above and the franchises in key regions. We have a question about expansion before we get out. We'll tackle real quick, but I mean, these are all, I don't know if I would have put attendance. I think I probably would have put maybe in current regions just to kind of get more of a breadth of the US on that. I mean, I think Fox has the money. I mean, Fox is going to be in this as much as they're going to be in it or not. I don't think stressing about that is doesn't change whatever, Fox has their own, but I guess that's where I would put. What would be your vote on this one before we move on?
I mean, I kind of think long-term financial backing, just because we've seen before ownership being 100% committed to spring football until they're not. And so it's easy to go out and put on a happy face and say, And for Russ Brandon and Moose Johnston, who, by the way, are not part of ownership, so they can go out and say, hey, ownership is dedicated to this, but they're not the ones writing the checks. The one thing I do wonder is there are a lot of fingers in the UFL pie. I mean, if, let's say, ESPN says, we're not interested anymore, we're going to back away from this. Do Fox and Redbird and Danny Garcia and Dwayne Johnson, do they just like kind of put more money into it, or do they all at once back away and say no? So because there are a lot of different ownership figures in this, you could conceivably see one, maybe it's Dwayne Johnson and Danny Garcia, who say, we're going to sell our ownership shares to Fox or whatever like that. And then does the league keep going? Or is it like, if one pulls out, they all pull out? So I don't know. Having so many owners is good in some ways. It can be complicated in some ways, but that's a question I wonder sometimes as well.
And I think it was Mike Mitchell kind of reported that, where, basically Fox was like, we kind of need someone else to kind of help burden this a little bit here in terms of, not even maybe a money thing, but just like it kind of be like me, like, I'm kind of done with this podcast. Like, Greg, you want to, or whoever, like, do you want to come on and like, it feels like that to me was more, So if like ESPN got out, or The Rock and Danny, like, I think Fox is like, okay, like, that's fine. I don't feel like they are, I think that they were probably, teetering on the fence. I'm not saying their foot was all the way out, but I think it was like, hey, we need some help here. We got help. Okay, we'll keep kind of figure. I mean, that's how I read it, but I mean, that's your interpretation's open to anything. So, favorite gameplay element. Yeah. So we have a couple rules here, and then we'll have some questions. We talk about the kickoff, the tiered extra points, 4th and 15 option when trailing. Coaches can challenge, the clock rules. I voted. I like them all because I do like them all. And we'll get into the kickoff here, the next question, which I think is interesting. But, as someone that is a strong proponent of Sam Schwartzstein and the dynamic kickoffs and all the rules and everything, the innovations of the XFL, I'm a big fan of all of them. The challenge, that's something I think we're looking at for the NFL as well. Curious, do you have any big, strong takeaways from this?
Certainly another good sign for the league that 1/3 of respondents here liked all the rules. And so that works for a lot of people. And then you have, the rules that are specifically different from the NFL are the ones that get the most votes here. Coaches being able to challenge any play, the 4th and 15 option, the tiered extra points. You have the kickoff from the 20-yard line that is similar historically to what the NFL has done, not getting as many votes. I like that, the coaches challenge got a lot of votes. I thought that was interesting, but the fact that so many fans liked all of them is a good sign for the league.
I did laugh. I think it was the first time we played Dallas that we lost the Commanders, and I was just like incredulous. But I'm pretty sure Brandon Aubrey kicked it out of bounds. Whatever is the worst penalty for the kickoff. I think if you kick it out of bounds, it goes to the 40. And I was like, well, Brandon Aubrey got to practice the kickoff in the USFL. Maybe he would have been better. So then the follow-up to this question is, the least favorite. So we'll get to that. I forgot we had this one. What's your least favorite rule? Kickoff from the 20-yard line at 30%. So that'll obviously segue into the, should the UFL adopt the XFL kickoff overwhelmingly over 60%? I feels like they're going to stick with it and not. I don't know. I see Daryl being a hard nose on this. Curious your thoughts, because to me, that's the takeaway from all of this is people don't like the kickoff and they want it changed.
Again, you got to remember that this website where we ran the survey used to be XFL Board. Yeah. So a lot of the people who come to this website still for the UFL were probably XFL fans to begin with. So that could color the results of that when you have a lot of maybe more XFL fans than USFL fans taking this survey. Just throwing that out there. The thing to remember too is the NFL adopted the XFL style kickoff, but remember, it was kind of a 1-year experiment, and they're going to revisit that in the offseason. So the last thing Daryl Johnston wants to happen is say, okay, because the NFL went back to the XFL kickoff, and because we want apples to apples comparison for NFL scouts to look at coverage guys in our league to sign them into the NFL, we're going to go back to the XFL style kickoff. And then later on, the NFL competition committee says, yeah, we didn't like that XFL kickoff. Yeah. Let's go back to the regular. And then it's like, you're back in the same situation you were in this year, only reversed. So I that's part of the reason I think I agree with you. I think they stick, the UFL does, with the kickoff rule this year, but clearly there is an appetite among fans to re-adopt the XFL style kickoff in spring football.
I agree with that. I'll lay my side here so we can get to these expansion questions and then get you out of here, hopefully. Before too long here, I appreciate your time, and I know it's busy with all that. Should the UFL, question 11, should the UFL have expanded its number of teams in your expansion? Pretty, 50-50 here, 44% and then 45% for no. Such a hot button issue, but I think most people realize, or at least the thin majority here realize, like it's probably prudent to wait here before expanding. Are you surprised that it was so evenly matched and that people want to be no expansion?
I was surprised that it was so evenly matched. I thought, and I didn't really have a good sense of what side was going to win out, whether it was the yes or the no, but I did think one was going to have significantly more than the other. So to see it not only close, but within a percentage point of each other was surprising to me. I still think there are fans who they love talking about expansion. Expansion is a sign of a healthy league, and they kind of want to will the league to health by having expansion. And then you have the more judicious fans like ourselves, probably, who say, let's crawl before we walk. Let's get the franchises we have in a healthier state before we start adding more teams. And so that's kind of my theory of the case anyway. And so I'm a no, but I do think it's a good sign that they've kind of opened up the expansion process. They're not committing to expanding for year 3. They are just kind of testing the waters a little bit. And who knows, maybe if they get real interest from some of these cities and the infrastructure is there in those cities for it to work, we may see 2 teams in 2026. But the fact that they're opening expansion without committing to say, yes, we are absolutely expanding in 2026, doesn't put them behind the 8 ball when push comes to shove. It gives them flexibility to either add teams or to not, and to delay it another year.
I'll have a follow-up here. I think Chris has about the expansion before we get out. I will just, for the 10% that said they have no opinion, everybody has an opinion on expansion. So that is a lie. That is no one has no opinion on spring football expansion.
I even wrote that. I wrote that at the end of my analysis. I wish I could put myself in the shoes of the people who have no opinion.
Yeah. There we go. Partaking nonetheless. All right. So the last one here, and then we'll get into a couple of bonus people I'd asked. Have UFL expands future markets? What should be its first new market? Other. So clearly nobody liked any of that, but you had the good list here.
Yep.
Kind of your standouts. Seattle, Orlando, Canton, New York, San Diego, Chicago, Phoenix. Oakland, I think Oakland makes a lot of sense. I know people hate the California taxes or whatever. Was there a different, because you said please specify, was there a different one that you were, or was it just like Poughkeepsie, whatever? I mean, was there another city that you forgot, or was it just
it probably was a city I forgot, but I tried to do the same thing here. I tried to collect and remember in all the expansion hullabaloo that I've read about. I tried to take it, the cities that I was hearing over and over again, people bringing up, and put them in there. New Orleans was one that a dozen people had brought up. New Orleans, Oklahoma City, and Tulsa, somewhere in Oklahoma, got multiple votes. But yeah, there were almost 20 cities or states that people put in the comments who voted other. So there is not a real consensus about where the UFL should go when they expand, at least among the fans that were surveyed here. But I think the fan base probably would want more coverage of the United States, which makes Oklahoma a tough sell, and which makes New Orleans a tough sell, because that's all kind of still within the confines of where the league is right now. So if you want the league to expand, I think you really do need to quite literally expand the map in the United States, and you need to go to a Seattle or, some of these other
Oakland, San Diego.
Some of these cities that touch pieces of the United States that the UFL doesn't currently touch right now, even if it may be difficult and maybe more expensive in terms of flights or whatever the case may be.
Last thing on this, it's just hard. And obviously I'm a big proponent of targeting non-UFL markets, right? Like we've seen St. Louis here be successful, and DC is an NFL market, but when the XFL started in there, no one liked Dan Snyder, so no one wanted to support the Washington team. I think that's but generally, like, the NFL markets are NFL markets because they have the people and everything that attracts an NFL market. So when you start throwing out these random, there's a reason why Canton does not have an NFL franchise right now. Like it just,
Right.
so when we're trying to reinvent the map, like there is a reason why some of these work and some of these don't. Any other thoughts on the survey? And then I have a couple questions from the listeners before we get out.
Well, just to touch upon what you're talking about, there were a lot of people in the comments who said go to non-NFL cities. And you have to remember, it's not as easy as that. It's not going to magically work because they don't have an NFL team, right? Otherwise, Memphis would be drawing 25,000 a game. So I don't think it's not a magic wand that you can put over things and say, okay, this team doesn't have an NFL team, or the city doesn't have an NFL team, so let's put a UFL team there. There has to be more in-depth research done in the market to determine whether or not that's a place you want to go if you're the UFL.
Well, and I think that there's a misconception from ownership of, I don't even know if they get really why some of these markets have worked. I mean, you look at San Antonio, not an NFL market, does not work. And we've had many San Antonio fans like bemoan that of like, no, we want to prove that we can have an NFL franchise. We want, and people aren't showing up and they're upset, but like, I mean, St. Louis works A, because they do not have an NFL franchise, but B, it's because of the work that's been put in there for 6 years. Like I said, I would say the same thing with DC. Like when the XFL started, they were not an NFL. No one wanted to support Dan Snyder, so they went. But like Birmingham, I mean, they've had this hub anyway. Just being an NFL market, like you said, isn't in and of itself enough to justify going to those places.
And that's when I wrote my column a couple of weeks ago about how the UFL came to be. Taking your inspiration about these locations, and just one of the things that I tried to dig into is why was DC working the way it was? And you're right, it was an NFL city, but nobody liked the Washington football team because nobody liked the ownership. So they were going to give him a big middle finger by going and supporting the Defenders instead. And, so I tried to look at these markets individually and why is the UFL there? What made the USFL or XFL want to be there in the first place? And why they've had the success or haven't had the success that they've experienced over the last couple of years.
All right, a couple questions. So Chris, he wants us to break down all the potential buyers. We're not going to do that, but I am curious your thoughts because we haven't talked to you about the expansion. Like we're opening this now, just a weird way to handle that. And I guess like egg on your face if no one wants to do it. Just, do you have any thoughts on just like, we're open. Like if you want to talk to us, like we're here, but maybe takes less pressure off because we're not reaching out, but also now we've opened this kind of can of worms. Just curious your thoughts on that.
I'm trying to remember XFL 2020. I think they actually had cities kind of like send proposals to the league and say, hey, we want a team. This is why it'll work here. And it sounds like that's kind of what the UFL is trying to get cities to do. They said, okay, this proof of concept that we put out there works. The UFL works. Now we want, instead of us going, hat in hand to these cities to say, gee, can we play in your stadium? They want cities coming to them and want to be a part of this league. So I kind of like the way they did it because, as I said earlier, it's really a win-win. Like if they don't expand the next year, they didn't put a time frame on it, right? They didn't say we're expanding in 2026. We want teams to come. Now, if you don't expand, you're like, okay, well, what happened, right? But also they're kind of doing that to show fans, to show, again, all of this is smoke and mirrors meant to present the UFL as a viable product for marketing purposes, for sponsors, for potential team owners of the teams that are in existence today, for potential investors in the league. And by putting out this announcement that they're looking into expansion, what's the first takeaway that you have for that? This league must be healthy enough if they're willing to expand. Now I was on the fence about sponsoring. Now I feel like this league is going to be around for a few years. I'm going to put my money into it. So you could look at it that way. And, maybe if that works and if that attracts one extra sponsor, maybe it was worth it. But again, it's not time sensitive. If the UFL doesn't find viable cities, they don't have to do anything. It was just one press release. Like they didn't go on this huge media tour where they said, we're expanding. It was just a press release. If nothing ever happens, nothing happens, I guess.
Just speaking of that, like, talk to the CFL about like, oh, we just got to find the city. Like, they got all sorts of cities and stadiums and everything. They can't figure out a 10th. I mean, they haven't been able to figure out a 10th team forever here.
Mhm.
I will just, the idea of sponsoring the UFL is kind of like, I used to work at the NBC station here, and we had like basically our own like closed station, like closed network, like talk show every, it was like noon every day. Margaret Larson would talk to you. And I remember when I quit and I was doing my wedding stuff, and they're like, oh, would you like to come on? I think it was called New Day Northwest. Like, you can come on our show and talk with Margaret Larson about like, it's $20,000 to sponsor a spot. And I'm like, I'm not paying you $20,000 to come on. Like, so it feels a little bit that way. Okay, where's my money going here to this like New Day Northwest? Like, yeah, let me sponsor the UFL and get like my Pedialyte, ads on the side of the, the stadium or whatever. Sports here was talking San Diego, Oakland. They seem opposed to California for some reason. Any sense in just like, it costs too much travel and taxes there?
Yeah, I think cost prohibitive right now. Same with New York. The taxes and just the cost is, if they can stay away from those places and be successful, they're going to want to do that. I mean, if push comes to shove and they feel like they can't be successful without there, they may, as one last gasp or last ditch effort to make the league work, they could try to put a team there. But I think they're going to try to make it work as much as they can without there. And to be honest, I mean, they can work around California. They kind of tried doing that with Vegas. And by the way, I did have one person vote for expansion in Vegas, which I could not tell I could not tell if they were trolling or not, but they did suggest Vegas as a city. Maybe it was a USFL fan and they didn't realize the dregs that the XFL went through in 2023. But I mean, you can put teams in Portland, you can put teams around, maybe in Phoenix, around California to kind of still attract some of those fans. Same with New York. There's enough big cities around the state of New York without needing to go into New York City to maybe where you can kind of pepper teams throughout there and attract a little bit more of the fan base there by being in the locality without being in the state.
Abdul wanted to talk about the TV ratings for Friday. I think we kind of touched on that. You said sub-million for 3 of the 4 college football games so far. You think, I mean, if UFL pulls in about 1 million, that's acceptable for Friday nights?
Yeah, it was actually college basketball. College football, they had a really
basketball. Yeah,
I did have a column about halfway through the college football season looking at their ratings, and there was a pretty wide gap. I mean, there were some games that were drawing 3 or 4 million, some games that were drawing barely 1 million. So there's a pretty big gap there for college football. For college basketball, there's been a couple games that have been drawn under 1 million. So I would say 1 million. I mean, look at what the UFL, I kind of use as a benchmark the UFL championship game. The most watched game of the season last year was 1.5 million. So if they can get 1 million for regular season games during the week, I think that's a win.
Yeah. And then it says, well, average attendance, I'm always somewhere in like 15, 20 for that. It depends market to market. I mean, 30,000 in St. Louis, if you got 30,000 in Houston, you'd probably do backflips, but certainly for that, any strong feelings on that, we can kind of work through that.
It would definitely be market to market. I can't say that there's one blanket number that's going to work for the entire league because these franchises all came to the UFL in different spots, right? At different levels of health in terms of the local attendance. I remember XFL 2001 all the way back then. I mean, 20,000 was the benchmark. Like that was the number that if you drew 20,000 or more, you were good. If you drew under 20,000, it was concerning. I think that's been wound down a little bit now in 2025, just because you mentioned the television ratings and the fragmentation, because there's so many different streaming services and there's so many different ways people consume television or a televised product these days. I think a lot of it is the same for football. Is there is a fragmentation in these cities. There's so much more to do in these places than there was 25 years ago when the XFL first kicked off, that it's going to be hard to draw that many, even for 5 games over the course of a couple months. So it is going to be different market to market, I think, in terms of what you're going to look at as successful in 2025.
Oh, I break my stuff here. Shark, Mako, talking about if they could do some like special defensive, offensive, special teams players of the week receive a bonus. That would be cool if I could figure out some more ways. I thought they announced that, or I thought they do announce that, but they pulled the bonuses right with the CBA. I'm pretty sure that's for that.
Yeah, there was some sort of grievance that I think the
Mm-hmm.
UFLPA filed last year because that was part of the agreement, and then the UFL didn't end up doing those players of the week, so there was no bonus money given out. That's going to be another interesting thing that doesn't get a lot of play is what's the UFLPA going to look like this year? The Steelworkers Union pulled out, and now we have Kenneth Farrow's group is now sort of leading the UFLPA. So are they going to have to come to a whole new agreement this year? Are they tweaking the agreement they had last year? What is that going to look like for 2025 for the players? So I'm kind of interested in seeing when that is released.
Let's get AJ McCarron involved in that. Then we don't have to hear from him complain anymore. Then he can set the conditions.
Well, it sounds like AJ McCarron might be having his own podcast soon. So we're not nearly done hearing AJ McCarron complain about things, unfortunately.
It's like Daniel Plainview and There Will Be Blood. Like, you are my competitor now, AJ McCarron. Like, we'll do all that. Just real quick with that, Dwayne Johnson be involved more with the marketing. It makes sense because he does the run to WrestleMania right now, but I think it's so focused on that. I think the timing works out, but I don't think there's enough bandwidth there for The Rock to do whatever he's going to do. Plus, because I feel like he's going to be in Vegas, right, for 41.
Yeah, well, who knows?
Okay, but I just I don't see him. I think the dream was like, oh, he's going to be on Raw, and then UFL. Like these are very separate, despondent worlds right now.
If it didn't happen last year when SmackDown was on Fox and the UFL was on Fox, then it's not going to happen this year when SmackDown isn't on Fox anymore. So they had a prime opportunity last year in the build to WrestleMania, and as you mentioned, The Rock being involved there, being a pretty frequent presence on television, weekly television for WWE, and they got really no extra press out of that. I would be surprised if it happened this year, but I do think that would be like the perfect melding of these two worlds. But for whatever reason, it's just not happening that way.
Well, also The Rock is whipping last year was whipping Cody with a bleeding belt. I don't know if then you want him to be like, hey, come watch my football league. I mean, because The Rock, I mean, it
is hard to do organically, I think, for The Rock. He's not going to go out and cut a promo on Cody Rhodes or cut a promo on somebody, and then as an aside, mention the Arlington Renegades game coming up on Saturday. It's just
big game.
Right. I mean, yeah. So it would be difficult.
Jenna and Joe and the No both want to know about the kickoff. We talked about that. Last couple here, Pip wants to know, just in terms of them, invested in these markets, is this make or break for any? I know Mike Mitchell said this was just make or break for the league. I say a lot of people they're announcing stuff, but it's still make or break for the league. It's very easy to cancel an expansion search or cancel a kicker showcase next January or whatever. But make or break certain markets, or I just just to make sure we touch on Pip's comment here.
I don't know, because the announcement of expansion certainly makes it seem like, it would be very hard to expand by 2 teams and then find another market for some of the teams that already exist.
Yeah.
So if they're planning on expansion, best case scenario 2026, that kind of gives me the idea that they also plan on keeping all these teams in these markets. And if you want to look at underperforming markets, Memphis certainly is, I think, on the verge of being concerning. I follow Steve Macy, one of their marketing guys, on social media, and he's constantly out in the community doing stuff. So it's not for lack of effort in places like Memphis. But I do think you want to see some growth in some ways, whether it's attendance, whether it's sponsorships. I noticed in the San Antonio Brahmas schedule release, they have a presenting sponsor for their season in San Antonio, which is really cool.
I think I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And those are the kind of opportunities that this league presents to sponsors in the community that, if you're a DC, if you're a DC business and you can't afford sponsorships with the Commanders, get in with the defenders or something like that. Or if you're in Memphis, you don't have maybe the Grizzlies, all their sponsorship is taken. So maybe you can market with the Showboats or something like that. So give as many opportunities as you can. Like stick a logo on anything you can to get that money from the community and to get a presence in that community. I think that's really important.
Yeah, WWE is already doing it on the mat now. You got all these things, all these sponsors. Last week, Alex, he just threw Phoenix in there. I agree. I think like just anything to get as far west as you can, I think would be great. And then the last question, Steven here says, if we want better quarterbacks, they're going to have to pay them better. Do you see this happening? You see a lot of quarterbacks now that could utilize some more, seasoning. I think maybe you could look back at like an Anthony Richardson, maybe could have benefited from not being thrust. You see all these new quarterbacks, that can't all be Jane Daniels. Just curious, long-term vision for that, just because you're going to have a wealth of, trying to get some of these guys in and attract better players.
I mean, I think they have pretty good quarterbacks right now. You always want to be better at every position for sure. But is the difference in the quarterbacks you have now versus the quarterbacks you would have, is it worth the extra money that you would be paying? And I really don't know if it's going to be worth it. I think, they've got Kellen Mond. They had Emory Jones before he signed with the Atlanta Falcons, a futures deal. So they are getting some young, talented quarterbacks with the pay structure that they have now. And we don't really know what that is. We assume quarterbacks are being paid more than regular players on the roster, but that number is never released, and it could be more of a case-by-case basis. If you're AJ McCarron, you're probably making more than Lindsey Scott, for example, right? But I don't think quarterback play, again, you always want to be better, especially because quarterbacks are the straw that stirs the drink when it comes to on-field play. And if you want to keep people happy with the on-field product, which we saw that they were in 2024, you want to continue to strive for a higher level quarterback play. I'm just not sure the juice is worth the squeeze, and the cost is going to be worth it to get incrementally better quarterback play, which is what you'd get for paying a little extra.
I think that was a good answer. Well, there you go. Well, it could be a really heated UFL media market this year. If AJ McCarron's got a podcast, and then Destroying has his show, and then I like this. We get in some feuds with other podcasts. Well, Greg, I appreciate it. I tried to keep it an hour. We went 10 minutes over with all the questions. I appreciate it with the paternity leave. Good luck with that. Obviously, I'll link this article. It's on UFL Board. Please like and subscribe. Greg, anything else here? Talk your wrestling coverage, any UFL stuff before we get out? I'm sure you'll have some stuff coming.
No, that's it. Thank you. I mean, it was great. I really enjoyed talking about the results. I wrote up my analysis of it, but to actually kind of bounce thoughts off of someone else was a lot of fun. So thanks for having me on to talk about that, Reed.
All right. Well, like I said, everyone like and subscribe. We'll be back. We'll figure it out. But I figured this was a good before Greg goes back. We could talk through all this. So I will play the outro. Live, but not live. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.